Hi, my amazing souls. It's your blissful soul, Katrina WW for Wajiko. Ha, with a new wig. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Okay, I welcome you and I welcome you back to this YouTube channel for another exciting episode. If you're new here, thank you for stopping by. You're most welcome to this 3 million community. You join by clicking the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. That's it, my loves. You join our blissful community. And for all my returning subscribers, my loves, thank you for always coming back. Thank you for showing love. Here is another video for you. Now, the UN Civil Societies Conference is happening, has happened on 9th and 10th, yes, and it didn't capture anything to do with us, persons with disability. So that's why we are in this meeting to bring up our views as different organizations of persons with disabilities for the message that we would want to go there because that's discriminatory. How in the world can anything that starts with UN and civil societies not have mention of persons with disabilities? And this is going to be in the Pact for the Future in September. Really now? No. Let's air our views and pray to God that they did get them and something is going to be done about it, alright? Thanks to UDPK for holding this. Man, always forever grateful for UDPK for holding us down as other OPDs.
So, because it's more about having a conversation within the group. And thank you so much for introducing the World Blind Union. As mentioned, I'm stationed here at the office of the African Union Blind since 5 years, something like that. But I lead sort of the World Blind Union's global work around inclusive and accessible cities because we see that cities are growing in different forms all over the world, but so are also accessibility barriers. So we need to come together to try to work with local and regional governments, national governments, and other stakeholders to ensure that when we are developing our cities, that we are not also then maintaining or reinforcing barriers. Right? So taking an inclusion lens underpinned by the CRPDs has been key for us in that work. And of course, I also thank Sally for the promotion of our policy brief on localization to solve the accessibility crisis, where it sort of talks about what's going on globally in terms of accessibility. It talks about uh, CRPD in relation to accessibility, but also to local development, and what we believe that national governments should do to support local governments remove accessibility barriers. So I wouldn't say that I know the UN system. I think even people within the UN, they don't know the UN system. And I think that's also why we see today that the United Nations is struggling in so many ways between member states who cannot agree on priorities. They cannot really concertedly address conflicts, disasters, etc. So that is why the UN is now on a path to try to address some of these issues as part of what they say like global multi-level governance. Right? So the UN system is currently taking stock on the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. So last year, the United Nations in New York, they had what they call the SDG Summit. So that was sort of the initial stock taking of the UN system when the member states to come together to discuss, okay, why are we failing on implementing the Sustainable Development Goals and what is required for the road ahead. So as a follow-up to the SDG Summit last year, this year they are going to have the Summit of the Future. Sounds very like idealistic, very ambitious. So I would have high expectations for that. So in preparations for that Summit of the Future, building on the SDG summit last year, they are also trying to chart or discuss between the member states on the way forward. Because now, as was highlighted before, we are at the midpoint of the SDGs, which were last from 2015 to 2030, so 15 years. And they are already now discussing what should come after 2030. What have we learned from this period? What should be our next steps? Right? You follow?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, good. Sometimes I have a hard time follow myself. So if I'm totally off track, shout at me, please. Because sometimes I can go in circles, and then sometimes I fail to loop back to myself. I lose myself. So now they are sort of preparing a key document for the Summit of the Future. The Summit of the Future will be in September. So yet again, the member states will come together, discuss the challenges, the recommendations, and the commitments of the national governments in the world on the way forward. So in preparations from last year's SDG Summit to the Summit of the Future this year, they are developing something which is called the Pact for the Future. So they are trying, as I said before, to build that based on the stock taking, address some of the top themes or challenges like climate, like youth engagement, gender inequalities, things like that, war and conflict, peace and security, etc., technology and innovation and science. So since last year, the global disability movement has to some extent been engaged in those discussions as part of more consultative mechanisms in the UN system to raise our voices, primarily through International Disability Alliance and others, in those discussions. Because we believe that this Pact for the Future really needs to make a very strong case on the inclusion of persons with disabilities and accessibility. Right? Because if we are not able to channel our voices into this discussion this year, our voices will not be accounted for in this Pact for the Future. And the Pact for the Future will then inform what the UN system is doing for the next, I would say, next decade, including developing what's coming after the Sustainable Development Goals. So this is why we are going to this UN Civil Society Conference here in Nairobi at the end of the coming week. Because in the UN in New York, around all of these processes just mentioned, it's focusing on the national governments. The national governments are given the space, they're taking the space. But there is very limited engagement of different types of civil society stakeholders. So that's why the UN system, they designed this civil society conference to be here. My personal opinion, not the opinion of the World Blind Union, is that it feels like they decouple it a bit from the official processes, which could, of course, weaken the outcomes. But that is another theoretical and philosophical discussion. So we're gathering here in the end of next week, together with, I think, around 5,000 other stakeholders. 5,000 participants were registered as yesterday, to come together and discuss what do we want to see in this Pact for the Future, this ideal document which will reshape the world order and all of that, which between you and me, that will not happen. But at least we need to stay hopeful and ambitious, right? Yeah, I'm starting to be a bit cynical about all of these global discussions because I believe that action needs to happen locally, right? Yeah, because that's where we as individuals and organization can make the most difference, impacting our everyday. Right? I mean, one example is, wouldn't you agree that it's easier to have a discussion with your local leaders and municipalities, local assemblies than approaching the minister or cabinet secretary, no?
Yeah.
And then maybe nothing will happen anyway. So, but if you can knock on the door of your ward leader or whatever, you can always try to hold them accountable because they will know who you are because you live in the same community, right? But regardless of that, let me look back. That now is the time for us to share what our key messages are, raise and take the opportunity of the civil society conference next week to really channel or like to raise our voices so that at least in those discussions they will be strongly recorded. Right? And that's also, I expect, why I was invited here today, to shed a little bit of light on these processes, but also to have a discussion with you of what you think the key messages should be. Right? Because it's not something Sally and I will sit in front of the computer and like, this sounds great, but because it needs to be anchored in our different realities, in our experiences from very diverse areas of expertise. So what I would like to have a discussion with you about now is what should the key messages be? Because in preparation of the conference next week, some of those stakeholders who are going to attend and be part of the previously highlighted side events have agreed on a few things. For example, there needs to be accessibility measures in place for us to meaningfully participate in the consultation processes as different type of organizational persons with disabilities. Because if the consultations are not meeting our accessibility requirements, how could we then effectively participate and raise our voices, right? But also that the UN system and national governments are truly implementing the CRPD and their pre-existing global commitments around the New Urban Agenda, the Sendai Framework on Disaster Risk Reduction, and the SDGs, and also the Charter on Inclusive Humanitarian Action, including the inclusion of persons with disabilities. Right? So one key question, which is a bit broad, I would say, which we would like to discuss with you today, is when we're now preparing to go for these consultation meetings or different types of events, what should we say? How, and you could think about it like very broad, like what do we want to tell all of the world's national governments, right? Beyond like implement your commitments, fulfill your obligation in the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. But how do we like to envision a truly inclusive future? So that's a bit broad. I don't know, Sally, if you want to add anything to this, maybe some clarifications or something like that.
Yeah, I think that is it really.
What have I?
I think that is it really. We have been, and I think also Edwin has alluded to this because to I think for us as OPDs, as persons with disability, it's about what being included means. And you rightly said, development discussions and agendas at the global level really don't mean anything if we cannot relate to them and custom make them to reflect our reality and to connect with our work at the local level, right? So I think it's all about us infusing our understanding about what being included means. And you can relate that to our experiences, the way you have been saying.
Thank you, our CEO. I just wanted to contribute to this. But before I even do that, I acknowledge the presence of Juan Edwin, CPM Global, for the support. And I see you, Mama Fatima, fondly known as Mama Africa. Yeah. And of course, Ioannis, and many of you here. I just wanted to acknowledge that your presence is very important, as Sally said early in the morning. And now, just to contribute to this, thankfully, I just came from the regional forum on SDGs in Addis. That's the regional forum talks on the issues of SDGs in Africa. Many different continents have their own regional forums, and then these regional forums again will build into these conversations. what I can say was the sharing there actually is what Yanis was talking about. This pact of the future. I think this is the document that is going. A lot of information will be put in that, so that it builds now to what they are calling the summit of the future and beyond. My take, at least when you are there during the participation, of course, as usual, in many places, the voices of persons with disability is very dismal. Again, in Addis, we were very few of us as OPDs, and so this is another opportunity because now they're in our home ground. I think we have this opportunity to infuse our voice. We got to meet the Undersecretary at the UN, the person we were told is responsible for writing this Pact of the Future. And during the plenary, we were surprised when he mentioned that also the issues of disabilities had not been captured as much. So, in fact, they said the initial document was about 30 pages. Then, courtesy of other groups, other activists, other organizations, not persons with disability, the document has grown to about 300 pages now. Our voices are not yet very in there. So it's important that when we go there, we are quite strategic. And I thank our secretary at UDPK for even having that side event. And whoever supporting us, we truly thank you. So in terms of contribution, again, for example, at the event, we were surprised that, of course, generalization is always big. So the words around persons with disability, such a word was, to use the least word, it was assassinated from the document. So the word persons with disabilities is not there. So we were campaigning for us to be featured as persons with disabilities. So obviously they talk of women and youth. Persons with disabilities are always left behind. So it's important that such words come out. Otherwise, again, we'll be left behind in the future. Yeah, this future we are talking about. And then again, also other issues that are upcoming, or rather current trends, the issues of climate change. There's a lot of green jobs, green skills, just transition. As persons with disabilities are not part of that conversation, so it's imperative that as we craft our document here, those things feature in the light of how they impact us, yeah, as persons with disabilities. I just wanted to make those few comments, and then maybe as we craft the document, I think for me, the messages that I could encourage, that one is the issue of course, building capacity around this climate justice, climate action. There's a lot of talk about these issues around funding of climate change issues, but we are not part of that. So it's important that also that funding talks how are they building or supporting persons with disabilities in that space. Then, of course, there's the issues of, we usually talk of the twin track approaches, whereby now whatever they're talking about has to not only support everyone and anyone, but also specifically feature persons with disabilities. I'm sorry again, I'm being very general here, but I think you understand what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Maybe as we move along, I'll probably think of others to support this. Thank you very much.
There is something that has been raised. Actually, I've been put on the spot, I think, because of the social media thing, to try and reach some of OPDs, beginning with UDPK, of course. There's this thing that has been going on for so long, that even persons with disabilities, we are grouped in the age bracket of 18 to 35 as a maximum mostly for opportunities. So these people came to me like, Katrina, help us to get this message out. Can you even try having a sitting with UDPK and other OPDs and air out, because I believe apart from the government, our OPDs know us much better. You know the challenges we go through. By the time we are getting to that age, it's like when most of us are really maturing, or you've been in school for way too long because of the challenges maybe coming with our conditions and sometimes the financial challenges as well. So we feel like it's not fair for persons with disabilities to be put in that age limit of 18 to 35, being a maximum for most opportunities. Like that is when some of us maybe even have fully accepted ourselves, have gotten an opportunity to study. Maybe that's when you've even gotten an employment, or you've been there for like 2, 3 years, and then now opportunities are coming for persons between 18 to 35, who most of them are either still in school, some even in high school, sadly as it is, or they've not finished campus, poverty being a reason, and then our conditions as they come, like maybe psychosocial or neurodivergent. You've had a spell or something, and then you have to be off school for some time. By the time you're getting back, the years didn't stop. So we feel like that age bracket, this should be taken up. It should be added for persons with disabilities, so that opportunities can be maybe pushed up to like 40 or something, to give more of us room. Yeah.
Yeah, very excellent point. Thank you, Katrina. And what you calling me Mwende, you look like are you sisters?
Mwende atatuambia.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that point.
Yeah.
I want to connect that. That's very critical what you said. Can I connect it to what Edwin, the preconditions that Edwin brought?
Yes.
There's need for understanding about
Mm.
marginalization,
True.
right?
Yeah.
So we agree we can combine that among the conditions, because I think not many people understand marginalization.
Mhm.
I was in a workshop the other day, and I think I was talking to you, Fatma. After that. So I was in a workshop. I was in a learning exchange. I think if you saw some of our platforms, we shared about a learning exchange that we had here with Colombia and Ghana.
Mhm.
How many of you saw that? We're talking about data.
Yeah.
So a lady from Ghana, she works with the Bureau of Statistics there, the KNBS of Ghana, was telling me, persons with disabilities are very sensitive. So I just listened to her. Even in Ghana, when we have sessions and how Ghanaians, when they come, they're very sensitive to issues. Then I said to myself, okay, so we need to you see the narrative out there, persons with disabilities are
Sensitive.
but is that true? Is that to say people without disabilities are not sensitive?
No.
So you see the narrative out there, and I said we need to create more, awareness. When somebody with a disability is passionate about an issue, it doesn't mean that sensitivity is exclusive to people with disabilities. People need to understand marginalization. Maybe you, as a person with a disability, when you're explaining a point and you're very passionate about it, so you see people's understanding or ignorance about marginalization. You're speaking from your passion is out of marginalization. So you raise a very critical point, and I think that also needs to be a precondition. That people also need to understand marginalization. You start school at 7 or 10 years when others began at 3 or 4. By the time you get employment,
You're in your late 30s.
right, and people, or even you go for an interview and people are asking you for 5, 10 years experience. So you see,
Yeah.
thank you for that point, Katrina. Yeah, please remember your name.
Your point is down.
By the end of this meeting, convened by UDPK, we were so happy, we were excited. At least we felt we were somewhere, okay, because we had come up with the key messages that we wanted to go to that UN Civil Societies Conference, so that persons with disabilities are not left out in the Summit for the Future coming up in September. And here are our messages. You see that? So we were happy we came up with something, and we know since UDPK had invites to the conference, we were sure our message was going to be passed, and once it was passed, we were hopeful. Isn't that what keeps us? Hope. Yeah, you got to be hopeful as long as you are alive. You have to be hopeful that things are going to get better, that better days are coming. So even as persons with disabilities, we are hopeful that our message did get to the UN conference on civil societies, and that they are going to consider us and ensure that we are part of the 300-paged document. Yes, so that we are not forgotten in the future. Like we say, disability is one very open club. Anybody is a candidate at any time. So, while you're still on the outside of this club, don't look down on the people that are inside the club. No one chooses it. Absolutely, no one chooses to be a member. Anyhow, we had lunch and then we went home because the rainy season and all. So that's it. I will be seeing you in the next video. Okay, so ensure you have subscribed, you have liked, share with me your comments. What do you think? And share with everyone. Okay.